So, Triss, you got to play a bit of Bayonetta Origins, Cereza, and the Lost Demon. A game we didn't really know too much about, really. Because when I watched your gameplay, I was like, oh, I didn't know this was a gameplay element. Didn't know this was a gameplay element. So basically, the first question I want to ask you about the preview you got to play is pretty much just your overall thoughts on it before we get into too much detail on the specifics. How did you feel about it going into it, and how did you feel coming out of it?
Right, so what's so interesting is ever since this game was announced back at the Game Awards, it's just had this air of mystery to it. Like, why are we getting this game so soon after Bayonetta 3? It has a demo in Bayonetta 3? This game is such a weird case. And going into it, I did not expect to get any answers to that question. I expected it was going to feel just as weird as it seems. In a good way, I should stress. Like, the air of mystery and wanting to learn more about it. I suspected that going into it, it would hopefully at least sell me on this kind of world they're starting to build here. Because now, we have the Bayonetta series, but now we have this origin story, quite literally called Bayonetta Origins. And the storybook formula is so fascinating to me. So, going off of that from the trailer initially, I figured I'd be in for at least a little bit of a good time with this. It should be interesting. And it definitely was, because I don't think I've ever played a game that feels this much like a storybook. Like, everything from the art style to the gameplay to the way the cutscenes play out, it really does feel like you're in the middle of a storybook. And
all without it being like a visual novel. There's still gameplay elements, but yeah, I know what you mean, right?
Yeah, it's not visual novel style, of course. Like, we've even seen some of the gameplay there. But in terms of, like, the theme they're going for and the way they're presenting it, it really does feel like you're reading a storybook, and then cutscene ends, goes into gameplay. Oh, right, there you go.
That's very fascinating, especially that art style is what really struck me, is because it does remind me a lot of Okami, which is another child of Kamiya, one of Kamiya's children, but it still plays very differently from what I've seen of it, and that's where I really want to get down to the nitty gritty. Triss, is the type of gameplay we're in for, because the trailer showed a lot, but we didn't really know what was going on in it. And now that I've seen the gameplay, it makes a whole lot of sense. So let's start a little bit with the gameplay loop, kind of like what are we in for here? You get to play as Cereza / Bayonetta and Chesire at the same time? What?
Yeah, and you're not swapping between them either. The way it was demonstrated to us, I mean, I played it with a Pro Controller, but they demonstrated it to us by literally holding two different Joy-Con. One side controls Cereza, the other side controls Chesire. So when you're playing and trying to move at both of them at the same time, you have to use both sticks to keep them going. And
how does that feel? Does that feel awkward, or does it feel all right from what you played?
There were a couple moments. One was partially my fault, where the way the paths were going or crossing, and because I was playing with the Pro Controller, I let it cross and kept them moving in that direction. I'm like, oh, this feels weird. The right stick's controlling the left side, and the left stick's controlling the right side. I should not have done this. But otherwise, it's really interesting, actually. So you don't always control both of them out at the same time. You can send out Chesire, like either you hold them like the little plush, or you can send them out to kind of be like the big demon out on his own. The game is very linear. So whenever you have to handle like a split path, because maybe Cereza comes across Rosemary and Chesire can't go near it because that's a demon repellent, so he'll have to take a different path. Or maybe there's something only Chesire can deal with, and then Cereza has to find a different way around. You find a lot of that despite the linear gameplay, it feels like you're constantly solving puzzles. And even with controlling both at the same time, it really starts to feel like a puzzle when you take down enemies that Chesire fights, but Cereza has to hold in place for Chesire to fight. So it all comes together in what really just feels like a big puzzle, and it's fascinating.
And so it controls really well too, which I should emphasize, because you hear controlling two characters with separate sticks. Mm-hmm. It's kind of paves the way for like, oh my goodness, that doesn't sound fun at all. But it does. There was another game like that which I haven't played, but from what I understand, Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons also played that way, and it was very much sort of a puzzle platformer type deal too. Mm-hmm. And this seems like it takes inspiration from that. And another Platinum game, Astral Chain. which you get to control like that little those big creatures. I forgot what they're called. It's been a long time since I've played.
It's been a long time.
So yeah, so it sounds like they took some inspiration there as well.
I think what helps is that, at least from what I've played, I don't know if like later in the game it changes, it's a very simple control scheme otherwise. Like, you're pretty much almost exclusively, outside like pressing the A button in like cutscenes, you're using the left stick for Cereza and the L and ZL buttons for her actions. And for Cheshire, you're using the right stick with the R and ZR buttons. And that's basically it.
Mm-hmm. So, and with that in mind, is this still a single-player game, or can it be co-op? Okay, so it's very much like, hey, one person's controlling both these characters, you're gonna have to deal with it.
Yeah, it's very much a single-player experience. I got the sense that if you tried to do multiplayer with it, you probably could. Like, if you're sitting there playing with like a sibling or like a relative that wants to join you, hand them probably not controller Cereza, so hand them the right Joy-Con and let them control Cheshire. That could probably work, but then there will be a lot of elements where suddenly you're in combat and they're the main person doing something while you as Cereza are at best stunning something or holding it in place for them. So they really work in tandem with each other that it could work for co-op gameplay, but I'm not sure if that's the point behind it.
That makes sense. Yeah, especially because of hug mode, I believe is what it's called. I love that name. Hug mode. That's where you're just controlling Cereza the whole time and she's holding Cheshire like a doll.
Yep.
But the doll you could still do stuff with, right? I saw in your gameplay a part where you're on a platform that's moving and you're like running on it, and you're using Cheshire to collect little emblems that are on the left and right sides.
Yeah,
because he has reach. You could still use him as like kind of a lasso.
Yeah, a lasso is a great description. Where basically still moving even when in hug mode and she's like clutching him. Using the right stick, you'll still kind of like go out. You can kind of make like a circle around Cereza for how far you can go. So you can kind of grab like little collectibles that are kind of far off, or there's a couple instances where there's like large flowers you kind of have to catapult yourself off of, but you have to like, without sending Cheshire out fully in his big demon form, just kind of let him reach out, grab it, and then you kind of launch Cereza with it. It's really interesting how even the hug mode, which feels like you should just be controlling Cereza, you still have a bit of control over what Cheshire does.
That's really cool. I like that, the sort of elements they're bringing to this. It's a very different style of game from Bayonetta, but it does have combat.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about that. From the footage I saw, there wasn't too much of it in what you got to play, but tell us how, in that little bit of experience you got with the combat, how is it? It doesn't look as in-depth as, the traditional Bayonetta games, but it still looks like there's a lot of punch to it.
Yeah, it's definitely not as in-depth. I mean, you're not trying to string together a ton of combos. It's basically one button, a bit of a hack and slash in that case. So if it's the one button, the ZR button for Cheshire to kind of do a bunch of hits with his claws, and eventually the enemy will go down. We learned after what I was able to record, you do also learn the standard R button can work as a counter. So if an enemy launches a projectile at you, you can counter it back at them. But it seems pretty basic on that front, in a good way for the control scheme, because I think if it got too complicated, too many buttons, too many things to do, it would start to feel really muddled. But it works really well with this control scheme, kind of keeping everything to one or two buttons.
It does make me wonder how much combat is going to play a part in this game. It sounds like, since it's so simplified and more of a hack and slash with just pressing one button, I mean, it sounds like it's probably there's not going to be too many combat encounters, and it's mainly going to be focused on those puzzle type elements where you're controlling both Cereza and Cheshire. Do you think that's the case here? Yeah,
that's definitely the sense I got. There may be instances of combat, but the most they would be is kind of like in traditional Bayonetta, where your path is blocked because a group of angels came in or something like that, and you just kind of have to clear out the area. And even then, that's as much. The most in-depth I feel that would get is, Cheshire's fighting this one enemy, but this other one is approaching Bayonetta's, or approaching Cereza. So hold it in place.
It doesn't matter. We can call her whatever.
Yeah. But so yeah, it kind of feels like the most in-depth it would get is making sure Cereza doesn't really get hit by things.
I see. And now let's Oh, but do you have anything else to add to that, or can we move on to talk about that?
It's basically just the fact that it does feel relatively simple for a game that feels very linear and simpler than traditional Bayonetta. But
Right, okay, and that's where I want to transition over to the story part of things, because there was a lot of story in that in that footage I saw, for better or for worse. But you were in like chapter 1 or 2, was it? So it kind of makes sense for there to be a lot of story in that regard. But tell us about how it's told, and tell us like what the basic premise is.
Yeah, so the storytelling is through like small cutscenes that appear on the pages of a book, and it's all narrated. So you'll have a narrator reading out everything happening, and you'll also have the voice acting from Cereza. Anything she says, she'll actually say. But, say, Chesire's dialogue, it sounds like almost like a grandmother reading out a story to a child, putting on silly voices and everything. And it has a certain charm to it, which is pretty nice. But the premise, we were actually shown the opening cutscene, and the premise is actually very similar to what we know of the story of Bayonetta, where she was a child of a Lumen Sage and an Umbra Witch, and that was a big no-no, so she grew up with... she was basically shunned, and her mother was locked away, but she learns her mother gets taken to an even deeper prison. She tries to rescue her, it fails. So she then... it wasn't quite clear if it was like exile or she goes out on her own journey, but she goes out to find this lone witch in the woods who gives her a task. And then what we played from there was like her adventure in the woods as she learns to control magic herself, and her ultimate quest of she wants to save her mother.
That's really cool. And Chesire was just her doll, but she tried to summon a demon, and we thought it didn't work. And then her doll's possessed by a demon, and the demon. I like the little touch they added, because the demon doesn't know his name. He doesn't have a name, so she's just like, well, I'm going to call you Chesire because that's my doll's name anyway. So
she's really upset about it too. She is upset that her cat is possessed by this demon. She doesn't want that to be the case.
I mean, look, would you be upset if your little Bowser backpack there was possessed by a demon? I'd be pretty upset.
Probably.
All right, so it sounds like there's some positives here, but I want to talk about things that made you go, So anything about this demo where you were kind of like, I don't know about this?
So the cutscenes are definitely slow, because like a lot of games where you have to advance the text manually, I'm sure there's probably an auto button that we just weren't given access to at this time, but the way these cutscenes play out with the narration and all that, they move slowly. Pretty slowly. So this entire first cutscene we got with Cereza getting ambushed by fairies and then summoning a demon, and the demon possesses Chesire, and then they learn to work together. That was a good, like, what felt like 5 to 8 minutes. I need to look at the exact time. It felt long to go through that. Now you could like keep pressing the A button to skip the page, then advance to the next page, then keep doing that, but it definitely feels a bit long to let it fully play out compared to what you would read. Because again, it's like it's a book narrated to a child. So they're enunciating, they're reading it as if they would a storybook. And there's a certain charm to that I wouldn't say makes it inherently negative, but it does make me feel like it kind of clashes with what the actual audience interested in a Bayonetta game would want out of the gameplay.
Yeah, I am with you there. When I felt that the cutscenes were super long too, from what I watched. But another part of it could be that this is just going to happen mostly at the beginning of the game because it's a lot of setup and stuff like that. So it might lessen a bit as the game goes on.
That's what I would hope.
That's what I would hope too. But what I could tell, at least from the little demo that I played in Bayonetta 3, and from what I saw in the footage, what concerns me are those little puzzles Cereza has to do, where I don't remember how they work, but it basically there's a dial, and you have to like flick the control stick when the dial hits a certain point on the little HUD thing. Those don't look very fun, and they look super repetitive. How did you feel about them?
It is like a quick little, almost like rhythm minigame where it's like timing based. You have to flick the stick in the right direction at the right time. It definitely, by the end of the demo, it definitely started to feel a little repetitive at just how much that was coming up. where the only other instance of her magic at this point we've seen, or that I got to see at least, is holding down the button to around an enemy eventually will make them stop in place with thorns. So it's either holding down a button or holding down the button long enough to then make a rhythm game appear. It does feel a little repetitive there, but given that the story seems like it's her journey to become an Umbra Witch, I would imagine she gets more abilities through the story that hopefully balances that out better.
Very cool. Yeah, so... all right, Triss, how are you feeling about this game? Are you going to pick it up? Do you think you'll try it out? Or is there some things you need to see more of before you really commit to playing this game in its entirety when it releases on March 17th, 2023?
When it was first revealed, I was hesitant because my immediate reaction was, as a Bayonetta fan that has yet to get to 3, I don't know why I would jump on this yet. But having actually played it now, the kind of puzzles that could appear really fascinate me because I've not really played a game like this before, where you're controlling 2 characters at the same time, and the kind of puzzles that can come from that, and figuring out how to separate, when to separate, and what kind of things to do, sounds like it'd be pretty fun. So I actually am thinking of getting this when it comes out.
I mean, it doesn't really sound like you need to finish Bayonetta 3 anyway, because it's a prequel, and now the timelines are messed up. So like, I don't even know what timeline this is set in. But all right, thanks so much, Triss, for talking about Bayonetta Origins with me. Cereza and the Lost Demon, super long title. Are we ever going to say the full title? I'm not sure. But is there any final thoughts you want to give before we close out this discussion?
I just want to reiterate, the visuals to this game really surprised me. And they look great, even though they have like kind of a low poly look. It really works for the style, and I love the amount of visual effects in this game too. It makes it really pretty, and I'm very curious to see what it looks like further into the game.
I'm gonna blow this game up on my TV. It's gonna look so good. I can't wait. But if you have any questions about Bayonetta Origins, Cereza and the Lost Demon, everyone, let us know in the comments below. We may or may not be able to answer them because embargoes, stuff like that. But thank you so much again, Triss, and thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on GameXplain. Bye-bye.